Fleet Marshal Orena Vash had commanded the Galactic Armada for 31 years.
What do you mean, unknown?
And in that time she had never once heard silence like the silence that fell over her bridge. The moment the sensor grid confirmed what her eyes refused to believe.
God
One
help
ship,
us all.
a single human vessel, unshielded by any escort, drifting into the contested boundary of the Galactic Threll corridor as though it owned the stars around it. And yet every officer on her bridge had gone rigid, weapons crews abandoning their stations to stare at the tactical display, because the ship's hull registered a mass-to-power ratio that made no sense against anything the Armada's threat catalog had ever recorded. Whatever that vessel was, it was not behaving like something that expected to lose. "Marshal," her tactical officer whispered, voice cracking, "our long-range scanners can't even resolve its weapon systems. It's like staring into a wall of static." He looked up from his console, and for a moment Vash saw something she rarely saw in a Galactic officer's eyes: genuine fear. Vash had faced down 3 rival armadas in her career, had broken the Threll blockade at Corvin Reach, with nothing but nerve, and a battered fleet held together by desperation and the sheer refusal to lose. She was not a woman easily rattled, had never once in 3 decades allowed doubt to show on her face in front of her crew. But something about that ship, its stillness, its patience, the way it simply waited in open space, without so much as adjusting course, to acknowledge 18 warships bearing down on it, sent a cold thread of dread up her spine that she could not name and did not like. She would understand that dread completely within the hour, and would spend years afterward wishing she hadn't. But none of this had begun in open space. It had begun 6 days earlier, in a War Council chamber 3 systems away, with a decision that would prove to be the single greatest miscalculation in Galactic Dominion history. The Galactic Dominion had spent 4 centuries carving its empire from the wreckage of 7 conquered systems, and its war doctrine rested on a simple, brutal truth its commanders had never once seen disproven: overwhelming numbers won wars. Grand Marshal Tessic Orlan, addressing the assembled War Council aboard the capital citadel of Kailis Prime, had built his entire career on that doctrine, and he saw no reason humanity would be any exception. Their colonies sprawl across a dozen systems with barely a warship to defend them, he told the council, swirling a cup of fermented resin wine with the casual confidence of a man who had never lost a campaign and had long since stopped imagining that he could. Scouts report their frontier fleets are scattered, undersupplied, and slow to respond. The Threll corridor sits between their space and ours, rich in the crystalline fuel our engines require. We take it before they even realize we've moved. By the time their bureaucracy finishes debating whether to care, the corridor will already fly Galactic colors. Not everyone in that chamber agreed. Commander Yuan Skal, youngest of the Dominion's ranking officers and the only one present who had personally studied humanity's brief, sparse historical record, raised the one objection that would be dismissed and later remembered as prophecy. "Every report we have on humanity describes a species that responds slowly to provocation, right up until the moment they don't," Skal said. "Our intelligence assumes their restraint is weakness. I would rather assume it's discipline, and be wrong, than assume it's weakness, and be catastrophically mistaken." The council had made a terrible mistake, dismissing that warning as junior caution, though it would take a devastating 6 hours for anyone to understand exactly how terrible Dashral Vash, tasked with leading the initial incursion into the Threll corridor, had expected exactly what her orders promised: an empty stretch of contested space, undefended, ripe for a quiet Galactic claim, before humanity's distant colonial government even noticed. Her armada of 18 warships, translated into the corridor with practiced precision, weapons cold, formation tight, expecting nothing more dangerous than empty stars, they found the single human ship waiting for them instead. "Hail them," Vash ordered, unwilling to let her crew's unease show in her own voice. "Standard contact protocol. Demand they identify themselves and withdraw." The response came almost instantly, translated through the Armada's linguistic matrix into something startlingly casual for a vessel facing 18 warships alone. "This is Captain Idris Renwick of the UNS Solus Vigil. You're currently sitting inside a treaty boundary your government agreed to respect 11 years ago. I'd suggest reviewing that agreement before you do something you can't take back." Vash's tactical officer laughed, a short, nervous bark that died the instant she glanced at him. "Marshal, that's one ship." "I'm aware," Vash said quietly, studying the human vessel's silhouette with a growing unease she couldn't fully justify. "Order the fleet to advance to engagement range. If they refuse to withdraw, we proceed as planned." That wasn't even the biggest surprise waiting for the Galactic Armada that day. As 18 warships closed the distance, their sensors finally penetrated enough of the human vessel's strange hull signature to register something that made every officer on Vash's bridge go pale. The Solace Vigil wasn't alone. It had never been alone. Cloaked in a stealth field so advanced the Armada's entire sensor suite had failed to detect it at any range, an entire human battle fleet had been sitting silently within the corridor for hours, patiently waiting for the Galactic ships to commit fully to their advance before revealing themselves. "Impossible," Vash breathed, watching 31 human vessels decloak in perfect formation around her own fleet, boxing them in with a precision that spoke of exhaustive preparation rather than luck. Her display flooded with hostile contacts faster than her tactical computer could properly classify them, warship after warship blinking into existence where empty space had been only seconds before. Their intelligence reports were wrong. Scal's voice cut in over the emergency channel, having been assigned to Vash's flagship against his own objections, his voice carrying none of the satisfaction he might have felt at being proven right. "I told the Council humanity's restraint wasn't weakness. I told them, and they laughed." Everything changed in the next few seconds. Captain Renwick's voice returned across every open channel, calm and unhurried, despite commanding a fleet that had just sprung the perfect trap. "You have 30 seconds to reverse course and withdraw from this corridor," Renwick said. "This is not a threat, it's a courtesy. We don't want this fight any more than you thought we couldn't win it." Vash's hands hovered over her command console, 31 years of Galactic doctrine, screaming at her to fire first, to never show hesitation in front of an enemy fleet, to trust the numbers she'd trusted her entire career. But the numbers had already failed her once today. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, one of her own subordinate captains made the decision for her. The Threll Vengeance, commanded by the aggressive and ambitious Captain Doric Fenn, broke formation and opened fire without authorization. Convinced that striking first was the only path to survival, the human response was immediate, devastatingly precise, and utterly without mercy toward the one ship that had fired, and pointedly restrained toward every other vessel in the Armada that hadn't. Within 90 seconds, the Threll Vengeance was a drifting, disabled hulk, its weapon systems methodically dismantled by human fire that never once targeted its life support or crew quarters. Every other Galactic ship remained untouched, weapons still cold, surrounded by a human fleet that had made its point with surgical, almost gentle precision. The truth stunned the entire Armada in that single moment of restraint. Humanity hadn't wanted a massacre. They had wanted a lesson. "Fleet Marshal Vash," Renwick's voice returned, quieter now, almost tired. "That ship fired without your order. I watched your hesitation on our sensors before it happened. I don't think you wanted this fight either." Vash stared at her tactical display, at 30 warships that could have annihilated her entire armada in the time it took her to draw breath, and understood with sudden, sickening clarity how close her people had come to a war they could never have won. "Stand down," she said finally, her voice carrying across her own fleet's channels. "All ships, weapons cold, we're withdrawing." Nobody knew what the human captain was hiding until the formal inquiry convened weeks later on Kalis Prime, when Commander Skal, newly promoted and newly listened to, presented evidence that reshaped the Dominion's entire understanding of the encounter. The Solace Vigil's fleet hadn't been assembled in response to the Galactic incursion at all. It had been stationed in the corridor for over a year, quietly, without provocation, specifically because human intelligence had detected years of Galactic scouting patterns, and correctly predicted exactly this kind of move. Not to start a war, but to prevent one before it could begin. They've been watching us prepare for this for a year, Skal told the War Council, and instead of striking first, the way our doctrine would have demanded, they waited. They built an overwhelming advantage and then used almost none of it. They gave us a chance to walk away instead of a reason to remember them as conquerors. Grand Marshal Orlan, humiliated by the Council's collapse of confidence in his doctrine, resigned his commission within the month, retreating to a quiet estate on the Dominion's outer rim, where, according to those who still corresponded with him, he spent his remaining years rereading every scrap of human history his intelligence division had ever gathered, searching for the warning signs he'd once dismissed as junior caution. Marshal Vache, praised for her restraint in the encounter's aftermath despite her own private doubts about deserving it, was appointed to lead the Dominion's first formal diplomatic delegation to human space. An assignment she had never sought and, for the first time in her long career, approached with genuine uncertainty rather than confidence. The journey to the neutral station took 11 days, and Vache spent most of them rereading the Solace Vigil's transmission logs, searching for the moment she should have understood what she was truly facing. She never found it. There had been no single moment, only a fleet that had chosen, from the very beginning, to be patient rather than proud. She met Captain Renwick again 3 months later, aboard a neutral station chosen for the historic first formal talks between their two civilizations, its corridors crowded with aides and translators, and the nervous energy of two empires trying to decide how much of their history they were willing to leave behind. He looked, she thought, disappointingly ordinary for a man who had commanded the fleet that nearly ended her career and her armada in the same afternoon. No ceremonial armor, no entourage, just a tired officer in a plain uniform who greeted her with a handshake instead of a salute. "Why hold back?" she asked him directly, unable to bury the question any longer. "You could have destroyed us completely. Every doctrine I've ever studied says you should have." Renwick considered the question with the weight it clearly deserved, taking a long moment before answering, as though he'd asked himself the same thing more than once. "Because the goal was never to win a battle, Marshal. It was to avoid a war neither of us could ever fully walk back from. If we'd wiped out your armada that day, your empire would have spent the next century building the fleet that finally kills us all in retaliation, and we'd have spent that same century watching our backs for it. Instead, you get to go home and tell your people the truth, that we could have destroyed you, and chose not to. That story does more to keep the peace than any victory ever could, because fear fades, Marshal. Gratitude, even reluctant gratitude, tends to last." Vache had no answer for that. In 31 years of Kellic military doctrine, built entirely on the certainty that strength meant total victory, no philosophy she'd ever studied, no commander she'd ever served under, had accounted for strength deliberately withheld as its own kind of message. Years later, addressing a new generation of Kellic fleet officers, Marshal Vache would tell the story of the Threll Corridor not as the day her armada nearly died, but as the day she learned the most dangerous fleet in the galaxy wasn't the one that fired first. It was the one patient enough to let you walk away, and honest enough to let you remember why. "They let us see their strength for exactly as long as it took to teach us something," she told her cadets. "And then they let us go, so that the lesson would outlive the fear. Remember that, all of you, the day you finally understand what it costs an enemy to show you mercy instead of victory, because that is the day you stop calling them an enemy at all."